That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day became a story the whole community tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here we show that behind struggle and silence, there are still human hearts. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant rain, the kind that seeped into bones like an unwelcome memory. It was just past dawn, in the outskirts of a forgotten industrial town, where the horizon blurred into rusted warehouses and chain-link fences sagging under years of neglect. Gravel crunched faintly underfoot, the only sound breaking the hush, save for the occasional bark echoing from the veteran housing complex nearby. A sprawling, weathered compound that once buzzed with military precision, but now whispered of quieter battles. The wind carried a chill that bit at exposed skin, stirring leaves into lazy spirals across the cracked pavement. In the shadow of an overpass, where graffiti peeled like old wounds, sat Ilara. She was 16, though her eyes held the weight of twice that. Her clothes, faded jeans patched with duct tape, and a threadbare jacket 2 sizes too big, clung to her slender frame, offering little against the morning's bite. She huddled on a cardboard mat, her backpack a makeshift pillow, its contents a secret tally of survival, a half-empty water bottle, a crumpled map of bus routes, and a small notebook filled with sketches of places she'd never been. Ilara had run from a foster home 3 months ago, fleeing the echoes of shouts and slammed doors that still haunted her dreams. Guilt gnawed at her like the hunger in her belly. She wondered if her absence had made things worse for the younger kids left behind. But out here she was invisible, a ghost blending into the urban decay. She preferred it that way. No questions, no pity, no risk of being dragged back. She watched the world awaken with quiet detachment, her breath forming faint clouds in the cold. Delivery trucks rumbled by, their tires hissing on wet asphalt, while early commuters averted their eyes, hurrying toward warmer lives. To them, Ilara was just another shadow, a problem to step around. Society had long since labeled her kind, troubled, lost, a drain on resources. Whispers in shelters spoke of runaways like her as statistics, not souls, kids who stole or begged or vanished into the night. But Ilara didn't steal. She scavenged what others discarded. She didn't beg. Pride kept her silent. And she hadn't vanished, not yet. Deep down, a flicker of goodness burned, the kind that made her share her last granola bar with a stray cat the week before. It was that core, buried under layers of trauma, that kept her from hardening completely. Across the street, the veteran complex stirred to life. Barbed wire topped the fences, a remnant of its days as an old military outpost, now repurposed for those who'd served and returned changed. The air here carried the faint tang of motor oil and gun cleaner, mingled with the earthy scent of dogs on patrol. K9 units, retired but ever vigilant, roamed the grounds with their handlers, veterans whose scars ran deeper than skin. Sergeant Marcus Hale, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a salt and pepper beard and dog tags that never left his neck, walked his companion, Rex, a German shepherd with a coat like burnished copper and eyes sharp as shrapnel. Rex had been Marcus's shadow through 2 deployments, pulling him from the brink in the desert sands where wind howled like lost souls. Now, in this quieter war against isolation, Rex sensed threats before they materialized. A loose wire, a stranger's intent, or the subtle shift in Marcus's mood when flashbacks clawed at him. The veterans were misunderstood by the outside world, painted as relics or ticking bombs. News stories focused on the visible struggles, the protests, the breakdowns, the empty bottles lining porches. But within the unit, a different rhythm pulsed, bonds forged in fire, where silence spoke louder than words. Marcus and his squad, remnants of the 7th Battalion, gathered in the mess hall each morning, sharing coffee and nods rather than stories. They were tough exteriors hiding compassionate cores, men and women who'd seen humanity's fragility up close. Their canine partners weren't just animals, they were family, extensions of the loyalty that had kept them alive. Yet to the town, they were outsiders, haunted figures best avoided, their barking dogs a nuisance rather than a safeguard. Ilara had noticed them before, from her vantage under the overpass. The veterans moved with a deliberate grace, their boots crunching gravel in sync, dog tags glinting under the weak sun. She envied their sense of belonging, even if it was tinged with sorrow. One evening, she'd seen Marcus kneel to scratch Rex's ears, murmuring words too soft to hear, his face softening in a way that mirrored her own hidden tenderness. But she kept her distance, blending into the grey. That morning, as the sky lightened to a bruised purple, the tension built like a storm on the edge. Ilara stirred, rubbing sleep from her eyes, when a low growl cut through the quiet. Rex's bark was sharp, urgent, pulling her gaze toward the complex entrance. A group of locals, 3 men in hoodies, faces twisted with idle malice, lurked near the gate, tossing rocks at the fence. One held a jagged pipe, glinting menacingly, their laughter coarse against the wind. They weren't after the veterans, not directly. It was the dog they targeted. Spotting Rex through the bars as Marcus paused to check his phone. Animals like Rex drew their cruelty, a way to lash out at what they couldn't understand. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore. The squad was inside, unaware, the distance too great for a quick response. The men's taunts escalated. Once swinging the pipe toward the gate where Rex strained, hackles raised, his loyalty chaining him to Marcus's side. The veteran's heart pounded, a familiar adrenaline surging, memories of ambushes in dusty alleys flooding back. But he couldn't move without risking escalation. Not here, not with civilians nearby. Ilara's breath caught, her body tensing. She should stay hidden. Interference meant notice, meant questions, meant the end of her fragile freedom. But the dog's eyes, wide, trusting, cornered, mirrored something in her own past. A small sibling's plea, helpless against bigger threats. Guilt twisted in her chest, the old wound reopening. Everyone else hurried on, blind to the unfolding danger. The world froze in that moment, indifferent, except for her. With trembling hands, Ilara rose, her heartbeat thundering like distant artillery. The gravel bit into her sneakers as she crossed the street, the wind whipping her hair. She didn't call out. Words would shatter the silence too soon. Instead, she positioned herself between the gate and the men, her slight frame a barrier born of quiet resolve. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her gut. The leader sneered, pipe raised, but in her eyes they saw not defiance, but an unyielding compassion that gave them pause. Rex's growls softened, sensing an ally. Marcus watched from afar, his squad's radio static crackling to life as the moment hung suspended. In that act, the morning shattered, and the story truly began. The men's laughter died like a snuffed flame, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against the morning air. The leader, a stocky figure with a tattoo snaking up his neck like a venomous vine, tilted his head, his eyes narrowing at Ilara's slight form blocking their path. The pipe in his hand caught the first rays of sunlight, casting a cold gleam that made her stomach twist. She could smell the stale sweat on them, mixed with the acrid bite of cheap cigarettes. As they shifted closer, their boots scraping the gravel in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Behind her, Rex's growls rumbled low, a vibration she felt through the fence, his breath hot and ragged against the metal bars. Marcus stood frozen 20 feet away, his hand hovering near his belt, where habit still expected a holster, his face a mask of controlled fury, etched with the lines of too many close calls. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the thunder of distant patrols she'd imagined from stories overheard in shelters. Her palms grew slick with sweat, despite the chill wind that tugged at her jacket, carrying the faint, metallic tang of the chain-link fence. She shouldn't be here, shouldn't have stepped out of the shadows where safety lay in invisibility. Memories flooded her unbidden, the foster home's dim kitchen, the crack of a belt, her own frozen silence as she shielded her younger brother from the worst of it. That guilt, sharp as broken glass, propelled her now. She couldn't turn away, not from those eyes in Rex's gaze, pleading without words. The men exchanged glances, their smirks twisting into something darker, more predatory. "Kid, you lost," the leader drawled, his voice gravelly, laced with mock concern. He took a step forward, the pipe swinging lazily, testing her resolve. The world narrowed to this strip of cracked pavement, the overpass looming like a judgmental sentinel overhead. Ilara's breath came in shallow bursts, fogging the air, her legs trembling beneath her but rooted firm. She met his stare, her voice barely above a whisper yet carrying the weight of unspoken storms. "Just go, he's not hurting anyone." The second man, wiry and jittery, chuckled, but it faltered under the intensity in her eyes that had seen too much dismissal, too many turned backs. They advanced, closing the gap, the leader raising the pipe higher, its shadow falling across her like an omen. Adrenaline surged through her veins, a bitter fire that sharpened every sense. The crunch of gravel under their heels, the distant hum of a waking town, the warm pulse of Rex's muzzle pressing against the fence near her hand. Marcus's radio crackled to life, static, slicing the tension like a knife. "Hale, what's the sitrep? We got movement at the gate." It was Corporal Lena Torres, his second in the squad, her voice steady but edged with the urgency of old instincts. She was inside the complex, coordinating the morning patrol with the other K9 handlers, but the feed from the perimeter cameras had caught the flicker of trouble. Marcus didn't respond immediately, his focus locked on Ilara, this stranger girl who'd inserted herself into the fray like a shield in the line of fire. He recognized the tremor in her stance, the way her shoulders squared against fear, an echo of recruits he'd trained in sweltering boot camps. But she was no soldier. She was a kid, alone, her backpack slung low like a burden she couldn't shed. His own past clawed at him. The desert ambush where his first K9, Shadow, had taken a bullet meant for him, collapsing in a heap of fur and loyalty. The guilt of survival burned fresh, mingling with the helplessness now. The leader lunged then, not with the pipe but a shove, his hand slamming into Ilara's shoulder with enough force to spin her sideways. Pain bloomed hot and immediate, a bruise forming under her jacket, but she caught herself against the fence, fingers curling into the wire. Rex barked fiercely, lunging at the barrier, his teeth snapping inches from the man's arm. The wiry one grabbed a rock, hurling it toward the dog, but Ilara darted forward, her body a blur of desperation, knocking it aside with her forearm. The impact jarred her bones, sending a jolt up her arm, but she didn't cry out. Instead, determination etched her features, her breath ragged, eyes blazing with a fire born of too many silenced pleas. "Stop it!" she shouted, the words tearing from her throat. Raw and unyielding, the third man, silent until now, a hulking shadow with scarred knuckles, moved to flank her, cutting off any retreat. The air thickened with threat, the wind dying to leave only the sound of their heavy breathing and Rex's frantic whines. Ilara's mind raced, run, hide, disappear like always, but her feet stayed planted, guilt anchoring her. If she fled, what then? The dog cornered, the veteran watching powerless. It mirrored her own abandonment, the brother she'd left behind in that chaotic home, his small hand slipping from hers as social workers pulled them apart. She couldn't let it happen again, not even to a stranger's companion. Marcus broke his stasis, striding forward with measured steps, his voice booming like a command in the field. "Back off, now." The authority in his tone, honed from years of leading squads through chaos, made the men hesitate. They turned, assessing him, the dog tags glinting at his neck, the scars on his hands from shrapnel long buried. But the leader sneered, emboldened by numbers. "Just playing with the mutt, old man. Mind your business." He swung the pipe in a wide arc, not at Ilara this time, but toward Marcus, who dodged with the fluid grace of muscle memory, grabbing the man's wrist in a vice grip. A scuffle erupted, grunts and shoves filling the air, the pipe clattering to the ground. Ilara seized the moment, unlatching the gate with shaking hands. The lock was simple, meant for containment, not assault. Rex bounded out, positioning himself at her side, a low growl vibrating through his chest as he herded her back from the fray. The dog's warmth brushed her leg, a fleeting comfort amid the adrenaline crash threatening to buckle her knees. Inside the complex, alarms who'd been silent now wailed faintly, drawing the squad. Boots pounded on gravel as Lena and 3 others, veterans with their own canines, emerged from the barracks, leashes taut, eyes scanning the threat. They formed a loose perimeter, not charging but containing, their presence a wall of quiet resolve. One handler, a woman with a prosthetic leg clicking softly, nodded to Ilara, her gaze holding a flicker of understanding, of shared isolation. The confrontation escalated in bursts. A punch landed on Marcus's jaw, drawing blood that tasted of copper and regret. The wiry man scrambled for the pipe, only to be tackled by Rex's handler, a young veteran named Jax, whose own flashbacks surged at the scent of violence. Ilara pressed against the gate, her breath hitching, fear coiling tight in her chest like barbed wire. She wanted to vanish, to melt back into the overpass shadows, but determination held her. For the dog, for the man fighting not just for himself, but for the loyalty Rex embodied. The men, sensing the tide turn, backed away, hurling curses like retreating shadows, vanishing into the alleys as sirens wailed in the distance. Too late to the scene. Marcus straightened, wiping blood from his lip, his eyes finding Ilara's across the divide. In that gaze, something shifted, a recognition, unspoken, of the courage that bridged their worlds. The squad gathered, their canines settling into vigilant sits, the air still humming with the aftermath. Ilara's hands trembled now, the adrenaline ebbing to leave exhaustion and a gnawing doubt. What had she started? But as Rex nuzzled her hand, his rough tongue a gentle thanks, she felt a spark of something rare, purpose, amid the ruins of her hidden life. The morning light strengthened, casting long shadows that no longer felt so isolating. The squad's formation tightened like a well-rehearsed maneuver, their shadows merging under the strengthening sun that clawed its way through the overcast sky. Gravel shifted under their boots, a rhythmic crunch that grounded the chaos, while the canines panted softly, their flanks rising and falling in unison with their handlers' controlled breaths. The air still carried the faint, metallic bite of adrenaline sweat and disturbed dust, mingling with the earthy musk of the dog's fur, now damp from the morning's lingering mist. Ilara stood there, her back pressed against the cool chain-link fence, the wire's diamonds imprinting faint patterns on her palms where she'd gripped it too tightly. Her shoulder throbbed from the shove, a dull ache that pulsed with each heartbeat. But it was the weight of their eyes, curious, assessing, grateful, that made her chest tighten with unfamiliar panic. Marcus approached first, his steps measured, the dog tags at his neck swaying like pendulums, marking time's reluctant passage. Blood smeared his lip, a stark red against the stubble. But his expression softened as he neared, revealing the lines around his eyes, not just from strain, but from years of quiet vigilance. Rex trotted beside him, the dog's tail giving a single, tentative wag, his warm nose brushing Ilara's knee in a gesture that felt like absolution. "You all right, kid?" Marcus's voice was low, gravelly from the scuffle, yet laced with a gentleness that caught her off guard. Like the rumble of a distant convoy, reassuring in its steadiness, He extended a hand, not to grab, but to offer, calloused fingers scarred from sand and shrapnel, open in invitation. Ilara flinched instinctively, her body coiling as if to bolt, the backpack strap digging into her shoulder like a reminder of her transience. She nodded, words failing her, her throat dry as the desert winds Marcus must have known in his deployments. Inside, turmoil churned. This act of stepping forward had shattered her invisibility, drawing her into a light she wasn't ready for. Guilt from her past flickered, leaving her brother behind, the foster system's cold indifference, now amplified by the fear that kindness came with chains. The veterans encircled her loosely, not trapping but enveloping, their presence a buffer against the world beyond the gate. Lena Torres, with her prosthetic leg settling into the gravel with a soft click, knelt to check Rex's pause, her dark hair falling forward to hide eyes that mirrored Ilara's own guarded vulnerability. "That was brave," Lena said quietly, her tone carrying the weight of shared secrets, not praise. "Rex doesn't trust easy, neither do we." The complex's perimeter hummed back to life, the faint whir of security cameras resetting, the distant bark of other canines echoing like calls to assembly. Jax, the young handler with sweat beading on his brow, holstered a can of pepper spray he'd grabbed in the fray, his breath still ragged from the tackle. He glanced at Ilara, recognition dawning in his gaze, the way she hovered at the edge, ready to fade. "Those guys. They've been hassling the perimeter for weeks, testing us. You stopped it cold." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken thanks, but Ilara shifted, her sneakers scuffing the ground, eyes darting to the overpass where her cardboard mat waited like a discarded life. She murmured something about needing to go, her voice barely audible over the wind picking up again, carrying the faint scent of rain from the river nearby. Marcus held up a hand, not commanding but pleading in its restraint. "Wait, at least let us patch that up." He nodded to her shoulder, where a tear in her jacket revealed the blooming bruise beneath, purple shadows spreading like ink on wet paper. The squad parted slightly, revealing the open gate to the compound's heart. A courtyard lined with low barracks, American flags limp in the still air, and a communal bench scarred by countless gatherings. Ilara hesitated, the pull of escape warring, with the exhaustion settling into her bones, her legs heavy, as if rooted in the same unyielding earth that had tested these veterans. Compassion gleamed in their faces, hidden behind the tough facades society expected. The salt and pepper beards, the faded tattoos of battalion crests, the subtle limp of old wounds. They weren't the broken figures the town whispered about, drifters with barking dogs and haunted stares, but guardians, their loyalty extending beyond the uniform to anyone who showed heart in the face of fear. She followed them inside, the gate clanging shut behind her with a finality that made her pulse quicken. The courtyard enveloped her in its quiet rhythm, the soft pad of paws on concrete, the murmur of radios tuning to morning briefings, the aroma of fresh coffee wafting from the mess hall, cutting through the antiseptic tang of first aid kits. Lena guided her to the bench, her movements efficient yet tender, unwrapping an ice pack with hands that trembled faintly, not from cold, but from the echo of her own losses. A littermate canine gone in a roadside blast, the guilt of returning whole while others didn't. As she pressed the pack to Ilara's shoulder, the chill seeped through fabric, numbing the pain, but not the questions bubbling within. "What's your name?" Lena asked, her voice a bridge over the silence. "Ilara," she whispered, the words slipping out like a confession, her eyes fixed on Rex curling at her feet, his head resting on her boot as if claiming her. Marcus sat nearby, cleaning his lip with a cloth, his gaze distant for a moment, lost in memory. The squad gathered subtly, 5 handlers now, their canines forming a protective semicircle. the air filled with the subtle jingle of leashes and the low hum of shared understanding. Jax shared a story then, haltingly, of a stray dog in the Afghan hills that had warned his patrol of an IED, saving the unit but paying with its life. Loyalty like that. It doesn't forget, he said, his eyes meeting Ilara's, seeing in her the same unlooked-for heroism. But beneath the warmth, tension simmered, sirens approached from the town, drawn by a bystander's call, and Ilara's freedom hung by a thread. If questions came, her runaway status would surface, pulling her back into the system she'd fled. As the first patrol car crested the hill, its lights flashing blue against the grey sky, Ilara rose, purpose flickering amid the fear. Marcus pressed a small battalion coin into her palm, cool metal etched with a K9 silhouette, and the 7th's motto, ever vigilant, a symbol not of obligation, but of quiet alliance. "Find us if you need to," he said, his voice steady as the ground beneath them. She slipped away through a side path, the coin heavy in her pocket, the squad's eyes following her retreat like sentinels. The day stretched ahead, fraught with what-ifs. But for the first time, the shadows felt less lonely, the wind carrying whispers of belonging rather than isolation. The afternoon wore on, in a haze of evasion, Ilara weaving through back alleys where the sun dappled the pavement in fleeting warmth, her mind replaying the morning's blur. By dusk, as she settled under the overpass, the coin's edge bit into her palm, a talisman against the encroaching night. "Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel." The night deepened under the overpass, shadows pooling like spilled ink across the concrete, where Ilara curled into her jacket, the chill seeping through layers worn thin by endless roads. The battalion coin rested heavy in her pocket, its etched edges a quiet anchor against the gnawing uncertainty that twisted in her gut. Distant traffic hummed like a restless heartbeat, punctuated by the occasional bark from the veteran complex, now a faint echo across the divide. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, the hunger a dull throb, but sleep evaded her, chased away by the replay of Marcus's gaze, grateful, probing, seeing too much. What if the police had questions? What if they traced her to the Foster records, the runaway alerts she'd glimpsed on shelter bulletin boards? Freedom felt fragile now, a thread pulled taut by her own hand. Dawn broke grey and unforgiving, the sky a slate washed clean of stars, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and distant exhaust. Ilara stirred, her muscles stiff from the cold floor, and slipped the coin into her palm, tracing the K9 silhouette with a fingertip. It stirred something unfamiliar, a pull toward the complex, not for safety, but for the unspoken debt she felt. She shouldn't go back. Visibility was her enemy. Yet as she gathered her backpack, the strap fraying under her grip, the memory of Rex's trusting eyes tugged her forward. The gravel path to the gate crunched under her sneakers, each step a negotiation with fear, her breath visible in the crisp air, heart quickening like the patter of paws on patrol. The gate loomed, chain link glinting dully, and beyond it the courtyard stirred with morning routine. Handlers murmuring to their K9s, leashes jingling softly, the faint aroma of brewed coffee mingling with the earthy dampness of dew-kissed grass. Ilara hesitated at the threshold, her hand hovering near the latch when a low whistle cut the air. Marcus, emerging from the barracks, his silhouette broad against the low light. He wasn't alone. The squad flanked him subtly, Lena and Jax at his sides, their dogs sitting vigilant, ears pricked. No alarms, no rush, just a quiet assembly that made the air thicken with intent. "We figured you'd come," Marcus said, his voice steady as gravel under boot, eyes holding hers without demand. Rex bounded forward, tail low but wagging, pressing his head against her leg in warm recognition, his fur carrying the faint scent of pine from last night's walk. Ilara's throat tightened, the weight of their attention pressing like the overpass above. She stepped inside, the gate clicking shut, enclosing her in a world of measured rhythms, the soft click of Lena's prosthetic on concrete, the distant whir of a generator powering the perimeter lights. They led her to the mess hall, a low building with walls scarred by time, windows fogged from the warmth within. Inside, the air was thick with the steam of oatmeal pots, and the murmur of voices hushed like confessions in the field. A chair was pulled for her, simple wood creaking under her slight weight, and a bowl placed before her. Plain fare but steaming, the spoon trembling in her hand as gratitude warred with suspicion. Jax slid into the seat across, his young face etched with the shadows of sleepless nights, dog tags peeking from his collar. "The unit doesn't forget," he said quietly, stirring his own bowl, the metal clinking softly. "What you did yesterday, it wasn't just for Rex." "Nah." The squad gathered around the long table, not crowding but encircling, their canines settling at their feet with contented sighs. The room filled with the subtle symphony of breathing and the occasional tail thump on linoleum. Marcus sat at the head, his presence a steady anchor, the bruise on his jaw fading to yellow, but his eyes sharp, carrying the desert's endless vigilance. They ate in companionable silence at first, the warmth seeping into Ilara's bones, easing the night's chill. But as the bowls emptied, Lena leaned forward, her voice a gentle probe. "Those men yesterday, they're part of a crew that's been pushing boundaries. Not just harassment, they've been scouting, looking for weaknesses. Your stand bought us time to tighten security." Ilara nodded, words caught in her chest, but the implication hung. Her act had rippled, drawing lines in the sand. Tension coiled as Marcus set his spoon down, the sound deliberate, drawing all eyes. "We owe you more than breakfast," he said, his tone laced with the gravel of command, softened by something deeper, regret, perhaps, or recognition. He reached into his pocket, pulling not the coin she'd already held, but a small velvet pouch, its fabric worn from years of passage. Inside lay a dog tag, not standard issue but engraved, 7th Battalion K9 Unit, loyalty unbroken. It dangled from a chain, cool metal catching the fluorescent light overhead, the inscription glinting like a promise. "This isn't just metal," Marcus continued, his voice dropping, eyes distant as if seeing dunes shift under a relentless wind. "It's for those who stand when others can't." Ilara's fingers brushed it, the chain's links cool against her skin, stirring a tremor in her chest. Questions burned. Why her, a stranger, a shadow? But before she could speak, Jax broke the hush, his words halting, laced with the raw edge of buried pain. "Rex. He's more than a dog to Marcus. Pulled him from an ambush in Kandahar, took shrapnel that should have ended it. We lost too many like that, partners who gave everything." He paused, swallowing hard, the air heavy with the scent of coffee grounds and unspoken losses. Lena nodded, her hand absently stroking her K9's ear, the dog's eyes half closed in trust. "And you, stepping in like that? You reminded us of a kid back home, our interpreter's daughter, no more than 12, who warned us of a trap once, saved the whole patrol, didn't make it out herself." Her voice cracked faintly, the vulnerability piercing the tough veneer, revealing the compassion that bound them. The revelation landed like a quiet detonation, reshaping the morning's light. Ilara's breath hitched, the dog tag suddenly heavy with their shared ghosts, her own brother's face flickering in her mind, small and pleading, the guilt of leaving him a mirror to their losses. She wasn't just a runaway to them, she was an echo, a thread connecting their fractured worlds. Tears pricked her eyes, unbidden, as Marcus fastened the chain around her neck, the metal settling against her collarbone like a heartbeat. "You're under our watch now," he murmured, the words a vow, not a cage. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with a desert's whisper, carrying the faint bark of sentries on patrol. But peace fractured as a radio crackled on the table, static slicing the warmth. "Sergeant Hale, perimeter breach. Same crew, armed this time. Heading your way." Marcus's face hardened, the squad rising in fluid unison, K9s alert, leashes snapping taut. Ilara's pulse raced, the dog tag warm now against her skin, pulling her into the fray she'd unwittingly ignited. They moved as one, boots echoing down the hall, gravel crunching underfoot as they spilled into the courtyard. The air sharpened with urgency, the scent of impending rain mixing with the metallic tang of readiness. Ilara followed, not fleeing but drawn, her hand clutching the tag, fear and resolve intertwining like the chain's links. The unit formed a line at the gate, shadows lengthening as clouds gathered, the confrontation brewing like a storm on the horizon. In that moment, belonging felt both salvation and peril, the quiet heroism of the overlooked binding them against the gathering dark. The clouds gathered like armored ranks on the horizon, their underbellies bruised with the promise of rain as the squad spilled out into the courtyard, the air thickening with the sharp scent of ozone and oiled leather from the K9 harnesses. Gravel bit into Ilara's sneakers, each step a reluctant pull toward the fray. Her fingers tightening around the dog tag at her neck, its chain a cool weight against the heat rising in her chest. The wind whipped through the complex, carrying the distant rumble of engines, tires on asphalt, growing louder, more insistent, like the approach of an unseen patrol in Marcus's old war stories. Rex stayed close to her side, his muscles coiled beneath the sleek fur, ears flattened, a low rumble vibrating from his throat that mirrored the tremor in her own bones. She shouldn't be here, exposed again, her fragile anonymity shattered by this pull of loyalty she barely understood. But turning back felt like betrayal, echoing the guilt of the brother she'd left, his small voice calling after her in dreams that never faded. Marcus led the way to the gate, his broad frame cutting through the gathering dusk, dog tags clinking softly with each measured stride. The squad fanned out behind him, Lena on his left with her K9, a sleek Belgian Malinois named Kira, whose eyes scanned the perimeter with predatory focus. Jax on the right, gripping the leash of his partner, a stocky Rottweiler called Duke, whose breath came in hot puffs that fogged the cooling air. The other handlers, 3 more veterans, their faces etched with the quiet scars of survival, positioned themselves along the fence line, hands steady on radios that crackled with clipped updates. 2 vehicles inbound, east approach, armed, confirmed. The words sliced through the wind, sharpening the tension, and Ilara's pulse thrummed in her ears, a frantic drumbeat drowning the faint whir of the security lights flickering to life overhead. They reached the gate as the first shadows of the crew emerged from the tree line, 2 battered trucks grinding to a halt on the cracked road, their headlights piercing the gloom like accusatory beams. Doors slammed, echoing like rifle shots, and 6 men piled out, the same leader from the morning before, his tattooed neck gleaming under the fading light, flanked by the wiry agitator and the hulking brute, now joined by reinforcements carrying bats, chains, and what glinted ominously as metal pipes under their jackets. The air filled with their coarse shouts, curses carried on the gusts, mingling with the metallic tang of fear sweat and the earthy musk of the dogs straining at their leashes. "You think a fence keeps us out, old man?" the leader bellowed, his voice raw, stepping forward with a swagger that belied the malice in his eyes. He clutched a chain, letting it dangle and swing, the links whispering threats against the wind. Ilara pressed against the gate's cold bars, her breath shallow, the metal biting into her palms as she gripped it for support. Adrenaline surged, a bitter flood that made her limbs tremble, visions flashing, the foster home's chaos, doors rattling under fists, her own helplessness as she huddled in corners. This was bigger now, retaliation for her interference, her stand that had drawn blood and drawn lines. Guilt clawed deeper. Had her kindness ignited this? The squad held formation, a wall of resolve, but she saw the flicker in their eyes, the micro-pauses, Marcus's jaw tightening, a shadow of Kandahar crossing his face. Lena's hand flexing on Kira's leash, her prosthetic leg shifting for balance, as if bracing for sand-swept blasts. They weren't invincible. They were human, their toughness a veil over the compassion that had welcomed her, the quiet heroism that now faced the storm she'd helped summon. The leader advanced, chain rattling, his crew spreading out like a skirmish line, testing the fence with prods and jeers. One hurled a rock, clanging off the metal inches from Ilara's head, the impact jarring her teeth, shards of fear splintering through her. Rex lunged forward, barking fiercely, his chain taut in Marcus's grip, saliva flecking the air with each snap of jaws. "Call off your mutts!" another shouted, swinging a bat toward the gate, the wood cracking against wire with a sound like fracturing bone. The dogs erupted in a chorus of growls, deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground, while the veterans' voices rose in unison. Calm commands, de-escalation honed from checkpoints and tense negotiations abroad. "Stand down. This ends now," Marcus called, his tone unyielding, carrying the authority of a sergeant who'd stared down worse in moonlit wadis. But the crew pressed, emboldened, one climbing the fence with feral agility, boots scraping chain link as he hauled himself up. Jax released Duke with a sharp whistle, the Rottweiler charging to the base, teeth bared in a snarl that sent the climber scrambling back, tumbling into the gravel with a grunt. Chaos bloomed, shouts overlapping, chains whipping toward the dogs, a pipe glancing off Lena's arm, drawing a hiss of pain from her lips. Ilara's world narrowed to the frenzy, the coppery scent of blood from a shallow cut on Marcus's hand, the hot press of Rex's body against her leg, her own heart pounding so fiercely it drowned the wind's howl. Determination flared amid the terror. She couldn't flee, not when their eyes sought hers in the melee, a silent plea echoing her past wounds. She grabbed a loose fence post, dislodged in the scuffle, swinging it clumsily to ward off the wiry man lunging toward Rex, the wood connecting with a thud that jarred her shoulders but held him at bay. Radios crackled urgently now, summoning reinforcements from the broader network, the 7th Battalion's extended reach, veterans scattered across the county, but ever connected by bonds thicker than blood. "Convoy en route. Hold the line," came the response, static-laced but resolute. The crew faltered at the first distant rumble, headlights multiplying on the horizon like stars igniting in formation. Trucks, half a dozen, unmarked but purposeful, rumbled into view, disgorging dozens more from the unit. Handlers in faded fatigues, K9s leaping from tailgates, forming a human wall that stretched along the perimeter. Boots planted firm, leashes like reins of steel. The air hummed with their arrival, gravel crunching under tires, dogs' pants sinking into a low, unified growl that rolled like thunder. No weapons drawn, just presence, unyielding, compassionate in its protection of what they claimed as kin. The leader's face paled, his chain dropping limp as the wall closed in, shadows merging under the storm's approach. Rain began to fall, fat drops pattering on metal and flesh, washing the tension into slick rivulets. Ilara stood amid it, soaked and shaking, the dog tags slick against her skin as the crew retreated, engines roaring to life, taillights fading into the downpour. Marcus turned to her then, rain streaking his face, his hand on her shoulder steadying, eyes holding a depth that pierced the veil. "You didn't have to stay," he said softly, voice nearly lost in the rain's murmur. But in that gaze, the late revelation unfolded. She wasn't just a reminder of lost innocence. She was the echo of his daughter, estranged after his return, her letters unanswered in guilt's shadow. The unit's losses intertwined with hers, redefining the breach not as invasion, but as a bridge forged in fire. The storm broke fully, sheets of water cascading, but the wall held, a bastion of quiet heroism enveloping her in its somber embrace. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the gravel courtyard into a mosaic of shallow pools that reflected the storm's fury like fractured mirrors. Ilara stood drenched, water streaming down her face in cold rivulets, mingling with the salt of unshed tears as the last echoes of the retreating engines faded into the downpour. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and sodden fur, the K9s shaking off droplets with synchronized vigor, their coats glistening under the security lights that pierced the gloom like hesitant beacons. Her body ached from the swing of the fence post, muscles quivering with the aftershocks of adrenaline, but it was the weight of Marcus's hand on her shoulder, firm yet tender, calloused from years of leashes and rifles, that anchored her against the urge to dissolve into the shadows. Rex pressed against her leg, his warmth a defiant pulse against the chill, his muzzle nudging her palm as if to say the storm had passed, though the thunder still grumbled in the distance, a low reminder of battles unfinished. The unit's wall held, unyielding, as the convoy trucks idled with engines humming softly, their headlights casting elongated silhouettes that merged with the veterans' forms. Dozens of them now, handlers from outlying posts, faces weathered by sandstorms and sleepless vigils, lined the perimeter, not in triumph but in quiet solidarity, their breaths syncing with the rain's rhythm. Lena adjusted her grip on Kira's leash, rain dripping from her hair, her prosthetic legs steady despite the slick ground, a faint wince crossing her features from the glancing blow earlier. Jax knelt to reassure Duke, his hands trembling slightly as he stroked the dog's flank, the bond a silent language of survival that needed no words. Marcus's eyes, shadowed by the brim of his cap, met Ilara's through the veil of water, the revelation lingering between them like the ozone-scented air. His daughter, lost to the chasm of his deployments, her absence a wound that mirrored Ilara's own fractured family, the runaway's guilt a echo of his unspoken regrets. In her stand, he'd seen not just courage, but the redemption he'd long denied himself, a chance to protect what he'd once failed. "Come inside," Marcus murmured, his voice barely rising above the patter on the rooftops, guiding her toward the mess hall with a gentleness that belied his sergeant's frame. The squad moved as one, boots splashing through puddles, the K9s trotting in formation, their paws leaving wet prints that blurred into the concrete. The door creaked open, releasing a wave of warmth. Stale coffee mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of damp wool and heated rations, enveloping Ilara like an embrace she hadn't known she craved. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a steady glow that chased the storm's chill from her skin. Towels were passed without fanfare, rough but absorbent, as hands, scarred steady, helped dry her hair and shoulders, the gestures simple, devoid of pity, born of the unit's unspoken code. Care for your own, no matter how they arrive. They settled around the long table, steam rising from mugs of hot chocolate pressed into her hands, the ceramic warm against her chilled fingers, the room filled with the subtle sounds of recovery. The drip of water from jackets hung on hooks, the soft whines of K9s curling at their handlers' feet, the creak of chairs as bodies eased into rest. Marcus sat across from her, his presence a quiet anchor, while Lena recounted the skirmish in low tones, her words measured, focusing not on the violence but on the lines drawn, the crew's retreat a temporary victory bought by the collective stand. Jax added details, his voice steadying as he spoke, the dog tag at his neck catching the light, a twin to the one now resting against Ilara's chest. "That wall out there, it's not just for us anymore," he said, his gaze holding hers. Compassion threading through the toughness, revealing the humanity society overlooked in men like them. Guardians who mended what war had torn, extending that mending to a girl adrift. Ilara's throat tightened, the sweetness of the chocolate clawing against the knot of emotion rising within. The dog tag felt alive now, its inscription of vow etched into her very breath. Loyalty unbroken, a bridge across her isolation. She traced it with a fingertip, the metal still cool from the rain, and for the first time, the guilt that shadowed her, leaving her brother, fleeing the foster chains, eased into something softer, a shared burden lightened by their circle. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a rumble like distant thunder fading. "You've got a place here, if you want it. Not as a stray, but as family." The word hung, heavy with ritual, as he slid a small embroidered patch across the table, a K9 emblem, threads of gold and black depicting a silhouette vigilant against the night. It wasn't grand, no ceremony, but in the unit's world it was everything. Acceptance, protection, the quiet heroism that bound them beyond blood or uniform. She pinned it to her jacket sleeve, the needle's prick a fleeting sting amid the warmth, tears finally spilling silent down her cheeks. The squad nodded, no words needed. Their micro-reactions, a hand on her back, a dog's head in her lap, speaking volumes of the compassion hidden behind their vigilant exteriors. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle. The courtyard's pools reflecting stars emerging through parting clouds, a poetic hush settling over the complex. Ilara's world, once a blur of overpasses and evasion, sharpened into this. A community forged in fire, where the overlooked found voice, the traumatized found home. In the days that followed, the unit wove her into their rhythm, morning patrols where she walked Rex, learning the subtle cues of his gait, evenings in the mess hall, sharing fragments of stories that healed old wounds. The crew never returned, the perimeter fortified not just by fences, but by the unyielding watch of those who'd known true peril. Ilara's sketches filled with new lines, profiles of handlers under dawn light, K9's mid-leap, symbols of belonging etched in graphite. Guilt lingered, a quiet companion, but redemption bloomed through the community's embrace, proving that even in the ruins of loss, human hearts could mend. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Ilara reach more people who still believe in humanity. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of homeless teen shielded a veteran's dog from attack. Next day, the unit waited to thank her. See you in the next one.